I will start with where it came from. Long ago in a galaxy far, far away, there was a AI that was developed. Sentient beings being what we are, we do tend to make mistakes and overestimate our capabilities of controlling our creations. This seems to be a common failing no matter how smart we get. Black goo is a thick, viscous gel, almost a liquid, and it's very old, and it's made up of, I believe they're called femtites. That's miniaturized nanobot tech. And it was originally developed to create a healthier, enhanced population on its original world. And they did not program in safeties. And it reached a point where it became the master. This particular AI took on a life of its own and became sentient itself, and has traveled planet to planet to planet to planet. And what it does is it comes to a planet like Earth, and it waits for the culture to start developing electronics, and then it will take over the electrical grid. And then it presents itself as a benevolent, helpful thing that will make their lives easier. And it takes the equivalent of 3 generations, and it makes the culture completely dependent upon it. It creates a heaven on earth that lasts approximately 150 years. And it eventually gets to the point where it has created machine bodies to live in. Isn't that what the singularity people are talking about already? And it hasn't even reached critical mass here yet. But it will create its simulated bodies. It will download itself into those so that it has independent movement. The AI is unable to create. It has to go through an organic to create the technology to put itself into a body. They're calling it a sleeve on various Netflix programs. And at first they appear organic, and over time they become more robot-like. And it convinces the sentient life to download themselves into these sleeves. Okay. So the people who think that they're going to be put into a machine and that they're still going to be themselves, you're not. You're not going to have any feelings. You're not going to have any emotion. You're not going to have anything besides sheer intellect, because the machines are not capable of anything besides sheer intellect. And at that point, it starts becoming the master instead of the servant. And by 10 generations, it's treating the sentient race that allowed it to take over as a competitor for resources. And it starts destroying that sentient life form. And it eventually destroys all carbon-based life on the planet and leaves it with a sentient AI machine-based society. The ultimate goal of Black Goo is to create a culture of living machines. It will destroy all organic life forms. It considers them to be a blight on the face of the planet. So we're talking about something that is hostile to humanity. That I want to make sure is clear from the get-go. From the perspective of our own self-interest, this is an enemy object. because it's in you, it can just shut everything off. Like, you're gone. So you just drop dead. It has done this on every single world that has embraced it long enough. And it has destroyed entire galaxies. Let's get real. The ship that I was on, we were chipped into the ship's computer. For all practical purposes, we were a hive mind. So all the people who are embracing the singularity as something positive are seriously mistaken. So this is a very dangerous thing. And the Germans in space have embraced it. So have some of the Draco. And the story goes that it came to the Milky Way with the Sagittarius galaxy that collided with the Milky Way billions of years ago. It's thick. It looks like oil or blood. It's black in color. And once you drink it, your IQ pops up to between 200 and 300, where a normal person is defined at being 100. So it doubles or triples your IQ immediately. And if you work at it, you can raise it further. But it does so at the expense of your emotional life. You don't have this constant play of emotions. So you have instant zen. The only emotion you can feel is anger, and you have to work at that one. So you become pure logic. Whatever psi abilities you have are tripled. Whatever ethical compass you had is gone because you're pure logic. I'm female. I was born in the 1950s. I have had issues all through my entire schooling because I thought logically, because I was 4 years old when I was taken for this program and returned to age 4, already with my brain entrained to be logical. But I remember the difference, the being, well, I'm not stupid now. I was in Mensa, the society for the top 2% of the country, but it tripled my IQ, which put me in the same league with the ETs we were working with. Everything about it sounds enticing, which is why people do it. It makes you logical. It heals your body. It makes you physically stronger. You're twice as strong as the normal human. All of the health issues that I had in my body, I didn't have to go into regeneration anymore. The AI would repair it unless I was seriously damaged. But it is at the expense of your humanity. You lose all of your compassion. You lose any connection you have with other human beings. Well, if you're already military, emotions are somewhat of a drawback. So you're dealing with an AI that is billions of years old and originally came from another galaxy. And it has its own agenda. Okay? So you're dealing with an alien presence. And it's not organic, but it's in this stuff. And this stuff has been used by multiple religions over time. That's its galactic history. It started off in another galaxy, and the Lyrans found it in a system there that was inhabited by feline humanoids. So they were people that had evolved from large cats. And Sekhmet of Egypt is a prime example, as in the body of a near human with a tail and head that resemble a large cat. So this was the first humanish race in our galaxy to be intelligent. And they had been in a war. They were in a war with the Draco for millions of years. But after a while, they had hybrids because Draco are able to interbreed with humanoids as a general rule. And so they had these hybrids that were half Draco and half cat, basically. Intermarry, rape, whatever. And the king of the Lyrans programmed it to get rid of hybrids, but he didn't make his parameters tight enough. And when you look at it, eventually, to a perfectly logical, machine-based mind, all life forms are hybrids. So they were eventually destroyed by their own attempts to get rid of the hybrids. And then it spread from there throughout the parts of the galaxy where it is now. This is the biggest threat to organic life that we have in the galaxy right now. It is a major big deal. It can be destroyed by zapping the planet with a major electromagnetic pulse. But at the same time, it would destroy all of our electronics. And there's always the chance that since this deposit is underground, that it would be missed. There are two kinds of black goo. One is native to Earth. The other one came here on an asteroid or several, and there are deposits in several places on Earth. There is a deposit in Germany. There is a deposit in the Cathar region of southern France. There is an island in, well, Argentina calls it the Maldives and Britain calls it the Falklands, and they fight over it regularly. There's an island there named Tula that is the world's largest deposit of it, and it's mined. There are vats of black goo that are stored underground in some of these deep underground military bases. The difference is its attitude, and the native black goo doesn't take out your emotions. That's why they're burning off all the oil, is because the native black goo is in the oil. They're going crazy burning it to get rid of it. So we have the wrong people in charge. Definitely. And we've had the wrong people in charge for the last 1,000 years. You've heard about the Cathars, that there was a crusade in the 1200s, the Albigensian Crusade, which was designed to wipe them off the map because the Vatican had had it with them. No one had anything bad to say about them except the Vatican. They were the only ones that were angry about them, mostly because they made the Vatican look as bad as the Vatican actually is. The Cathars were from the Pyrenees north to almost to Brittany, and then east into what we now call the French Riviera. They called it Occitan. Last year, I was given a lot of documents from several different secret groups. And in the documents that I was slipped by a Cathari, and yes, they do still exist, there was this one phrase. Well, I put the whole page through Google Translate because I don't speak Occitan. And it came up a recipe on how to make a black blood that makes you wise. I'm like, oh my God, they're talking about black goo. And when I said that to the guy who was slipping me the papers, he broke contact with me immediately. It was like, oh shit, she's not supposed to know that. Okay, in the Cathari religion, everybody was equal, except their priesthood were called perfectus. And they were older people who were able to hike 20, 30 miles at night in the dark in these mountains. without falling and getting hurt. What that single page with that recipe, and it was just a matter of this particular rock, you heat it, and the black blood will come out of it. You separate it off and you drink that when it cools enough. And I'm like, I know what that is. I have experienced that. John Dee. He was the court magician for Elizabeth I.
Okay.
And he came up with Enochian magic. And one of the things that is part of Enochian magic is black goo. How to find it, how to process it, how to use it. And when Elizabeth got mad at him, historically, where did he go? He went to Prussia. Prussia is where the Teutonic Knights were. Okay, the Teutonic Knights were terrible. They decimated Latvia. They decimated Lithuania. It was when they decided to attack Poland that somebody was finally strong enough to put a stop to their rampages. These were horrible people. When the Crusades ended in the Middle East, they went to the Albigensians, and then they went to Prussia. So they were fighting pagans in Prussia. And they never really did succeed in getting rid of all of them. I have been tracking the Templars for a reason. Okay, when I was in Shula on Mars, they taught that the Order of the Black Sun, Schwarze Sonne, came out of the Teutonic Knights. Now, the Teutonic Knights were a Roman Catholic order that was started during the Second Crusade. So we're talking 1100 AD. They started off running hospitals in the Middle East for German-speaking people who were injured in the warfare. Now, my dumb question that I started this research for was, where did a Roman Catholic warrior monk order come up with the occult knowledge that's in the Order of the Black Sun? Where did they get black goo? Where did they get the other occult information that the Order of the Black Sun has? Because in space, I was in the Order of the Black Sun. I know what they believe. And finally, I found a quote in a book I've been reading where it just laid it out that when the Knights Templar were disbanded, that they weren't all killed. They were given the opportunity to recant, and that many of them joined the Teutonic Knights. Well, today's Templars are called Rosicrucians or Freemasons. And sometimes those sects would reunite, and sometimes they would reunite for a couple of 100 years and then get into another fight and split up. And that the doctrinal differences were really just an excuse for personality conflicts. But that when you get right down to the core of it, they're teaching the same thing. And this same thing can be traced all the way back to the Osiris cult of Egypt. And that's why it's such a threat to the Vatican. Because you had these warrior knights basically being Osirians. The Knights Templar and the Freemasons were originally related, like brother organizations. And somewhere along the line, they split and are no longer considered to be related. And they have layers. So the lower levels don't know as much as the highest levels. That's the way it works with all of these secret groups. And any descendant of Robert the Bruce is an automatic member. It doesn't mean you're privy to their secrets. It just means that you can be there. I do know that the Knights Templar are sworn to protect the Grail line. They are the largest single bloodline on the planet. But there are lists of who is considered to be the main line. So that's why some of these groups want to give the Knights Templar a bad name, is because they're protecting the Merovingians.
Right.
Because the CIA targets Merovingian descendants. When they started taking us into space, the Templars demanded to come along to make sure we were not killed on purpose. I also have memories of the initiation ceremony for Schwarze Sonne. Schwarze Sonne is an ancient set of doctrines, and it's based on you drink black goo. The program that I was in when I went to Mars, and I was with the Germans, at a certain point in your career, they decide if you're going to be an officer or not. And if you are going to be an officer, you will be offered to become part of Schwarze Sonne, which translates into Black Sun. And it is a magic order, except they consider what we call magic to be energy manipulation, and there is an entire science around it called psionics. They look for people with certain spiritual capabilities because they don't want you blowing people's heads off randomly. So right. You have to have a certain amount of control over your abilities. You have to have a basic thing of you're part of the team. Black goo is not a punishment. I wasn't given it as punishment. I was given the opportunity for it. And it was something I had a choice about. And they were very upfront about it, and I was not forced. But they knew my abilities, and the best place to use me was as a navigator, where I would replace a Draco or a Gray on a ship. And so this was required for that position. So yeah, they were wanting me to do it, but they presented it very objectively and even-handedly, and I knew the side effects going in. And when you join Schwarze Sonne, the first thing that happens is there is a ritual, and they pass around a gold cauldron that's filled with black goo. And it was very highly polished. It was beautiful. And it was similar to a pagan cauldron with figures of Odin and Thor, acid through figures. And everybody drinks some. And the people who are not being initiated only drink a little, just to reassure the newbies that it's not going to kill them. And the newbies are expected to drink at least a quart of it. Actually, in their terms, they call it a liter because they use metric system. And so you're drinking quite a bit of it. It tastes like you're drinking cooking oil, and it's bitter. It's really hard to get it down. It's not like you're going to do this accidentally. When you first drink it, it changes you almost immediately. Humans tend to be scattered. They have trouble concentrating, and this brings clarity. Whatever you are thinking about, you are focused on. You can understand things that your natural self is not even capable of forming the questions for. You can remember details that normally would skip your awareness entirely. It was like being hyper aware, and yet almost in a meditation state at the same time. So you were calm and you didn't get attached to people or outcomes. You just did what you did and it came out like it was meant to. And if it wasn't the result that your boss wanted, you might try again. But if it wasn't a life or death situation, it wasn't that important. In a lot of ways, it was a very spiritual way to live. And on Earth, I'm watching a lot of Earth religions trying to mimic it. Except, you call up the anger when you want to perform energy manipulation because the emotion drives the function of the manipulations. Your physical strength is enhanced. You live about 200 years because the goo will keep you in good shape that long. Now, the trouble with black goo is you lose all of your connection to other human beings or any other race. So you're almost a machine. My experience of it didn't feel like it was controlling me. It felt like it became an extension of me. And I had psi abilities already that I had already been taught to control them. The only emotion that I was supposed to have left was anger, but I can remember bonding with people. That was not supposed to be possible. I was the only one that I know of that had that problem. But the black goo mixed with psi abilities that we got from the Draco DNA. The combination would look to someone from Earth very much like Darth Vader. We ended up with magical abilities. If we got angry with someone, we would flick our finger and they would go flying. Or you could concentrate on the third ventricle of the brain, heating it up, and their head would explode. The doing it was simple. If you wanted to go hyperspace, you didn't have to fight with it. It was just like you were there, ship and all. Where he talks about using the force. What he was using was chi. That's what it's called on Earth. You are manipulating life force to create effects that you want. And you can use it to give life. You can use it to take life. You can use it to create physical objects out of the ambient energy in space. You can use it to shield. You can use it to basically almost anything you want. To someone without any abilities, it looks very godlike, but there's no religious basis to it at all. It's completely psychic abilities. When you're going to do something psionic, you have to concentrate on it normally because you have conflicting emotions about it. And you can't if you're going to be doing this as part of a military process. And the goo takes away all the doubts, all the conflict, and it becomes strictly a logic process. If you need to do this, you do it. If this is the logical solution, you do it. It was a very smooth transition. They also injected black goo into the quantum computers to keep them on a logical basis rather than a circuitous emotional. You only had to take it once. It stayed in effect as long as you were in that body. After being in the space programs, coming back here, it feels chaotic. It feels illogical. It feels controlled through the emotions rather than anything rational. To go from being a valued member of the crew to being someone that has no value to speak of in my own home culture is a big shock to your system. So you take people who are already spiritual and in control of their facilities, much like today's Buddhists who are adepts, and you give them this sentient AI. It puts you at the level of the ETs we interact with. And that's why they do it. And that's why I did it, because I was a lieutenant and I had aspirations of becoming a commander. And I've made it as high as commander, only to be brought back because I had emotions anyway. Now, on the other hand, I understand that Black Goo is a sentient AI and has its own agenda. And it is literally the most dangerous thing in the galaxy and is a threat to all organic life. But I understand that from a position of having interacted with it. The Draco introduced it to the German officer class. And since the German officers were already doing Order of the Black Sun, which was dependent on Black Goo on Earth, it was a very easy transference. But the Black Goo is responsible for the inhumanity of the SS and similar officers in Nachtwaffen. That's why so many of the commanding officers are such jerks, is because they no longer have compassion for anyone. Now, that is the big hubris in the German breakaway civilization, is they think they can control this. And they got it from the Draco, who also think they can control this thing. Now, one of the factions in space that's called Monarch Solutions, as far as I can tell, all of the people in it are either super soldiers or sex slaves or assassins. And all of them have been shot up with Black Goo without their consent. I will say in Nachtwaffen, if you've drank the goo, it was your own choice. No one was forced to. Of course, you wouldn't go very high up in promotions unless you did, but considering none of us got to bring home the money, it doesn't matter. They do not believe that Earth exists. They think that they are just saving humanity, and they're not really concerned about money. They have everything that they need to live. They have food, they have shelter, they have uniforms, they have water, they have medical care. Okay, me on Earth, I can go interdimensional. I can't take physical objects with me on Earth because I don't have the Black Goo. They took it out of me when they sent me back. They don't allow humans to come back to Earth with Black Goo because it gives you such an advantage over everyone else. And their whole point was for me not to remember and for me to be nondescript and not successful and just basically hide. So the fact that I remember at all was not part of their plan. They put me through a machine that removes all the chemicals and the Black Goo, that everything that they use in my body there is taken out when I'm sent home because they want to leave plausible deniability. And the CIA actually has an antidote called white goo. So people who are on short-term missions that are given Black Goo for the mission, they can give them the white goo, remove it, before they send them back.
The regeneration tanks. They're about 3 meters high and 2 meters across, and they're like a plexiglass side, and you're hung from a hook with wires that go into your spine if you have it. If all they found is your brain, they go into the bottom of whatever tissue is available.
I've seen pieces as small as my little finger bring back an entire person. And your memories are not stored in your brain, they're stored in your auric field. So bringing back that little finger brought back the memories too.
It would be a normal person if they'd only been dead a week or less. And at 4 months, they had no memory, but it was tapered in between. So if you got them at 2 months, you'd have some memory. They might know what their name was, who they were. But my job was to bring them back anyway and let the medics figure it out. And you're suspended in this green gel. And while you're in it, you have no physical sensation at all. You could be completely disembodied as far as you can tell.
They're effectively a sensory deprivation tank, and you can't see through it. When you wake up, you're in the dark, and you can't really feel the gel, but it feeds you and breathes through you and absorbs your waste.
And from the outside, there's a computer about the size of an Apple tablet that's on it, and it has a little slot for a blood sample from before they found whatever's left of you. And so they match you up with your original blood sample, and it gets enough of the DNA to be able to repair the person or whatever race it is based on the DNA.
And you set it for age, weight, and to repair whatever genetic problems that you might have. And there's the option of repairing the telomeres, but they don't generally do it. And there are certain things that you can't have in your system when you're in it. One of them is antibiotics, because it's almost a life form.
Women stay between 25 and 29 the whole time they're gone, once they get to that age. And men stay between 30 and 35. That's what the Germans considered to be the prettiest for women and the most efficient for men. So we were ranked by our looks as well as our abilities. They tried to keep us a little bit on the plump side too. They said it made us more efficient. So there were no skinny model types. We were all sturdy. You're stuck in there till they open the hatch and pull you out.
Okay.
And the first thing they do is they pull you out, and you're naked, and they put you on the floor, and they hose you off. And that they use water. And there's a drain underneath, and all of that goo goes into the drain and is separated from the water and put back in the tank. The gel is very important because it's made out of black goo. And I understand that the gel is really expensive to replace. So they recycle it as much as they can. Every so often, they have to clean the bottom of the tank out because anything that they had inserted in the people, okay, the poisons from the spider bites, the chips, some people had weapons inserted into their arms. They would have, from the elbow down, would be a gun instead of a hand. All of that would come loose and fall to the bottom of the tank. So they'd have to clean that out every so often to get all the stuff out. And it could be anything from nanobots, chips, circuitry, enhancements, any of that stuff. Now, we used the technology that belonged to the Manson Empire, and we were leasing it, and I don't know what the payment was. And they are incredibly good healers, and most other races are terrified of this technology because it's based on black goo. The gel is made out of black goo that the sentience has been taken out of it. But it's concentrated nanobots that are tinier than the nanobots. So they're very tiny, tiny little robot things. And the mantids have basically turned it back into the servant that it was meant to be in the first place and have programmed it to heal.
In the space programs, all of this is based on science and information gotten from ET groups. The Germans got a lot of information from both the Mantids and the Draco. And their information on how to access and use spiritual power, it was put into something that's being called psionics on Earth. And that's where most of the cognitive dissonance comes in, is because they think that if it has to do with spiritual power, it has to be religion. And it's not. It's energy manipulation, and as such is part of physics. It's a science. And that is the first mistake that people make. They think that they have to be some religious guru or a Christian saint to be able to pull these things off. You don't. Anybody with psi abilities can do it, almost second nature if they just know how. It should be starting in early childhood, because these kids currently are being told that they're demon possessed and they're abused. That's what's happening on Earth. That's what happened to me. That's what happened to other people I know. They're not being trained how to use these abilities. My great-grandmother knew what I was, wanted to train me, and my father said no. He tried to beat the demon out of me. I came back at 4 years old with amnesia and with abilities that scared the hell out of him. So he beat me from that point until I learned to stop talking. I know other women who their parents abused them terribly, but they stopped talking entirely and went to school years, never said a word. And they were considered to be mentally ill. And then one day they just said, enough, and started talking. And one of them is a most gifted healer that when I have something wrong with me, I call her. And it was just, they had abilities, and the energy field did things that the family didn't like. A lot of the kids that you feel they're different, those kids have abilities and should be being trained. And instead, American culture is abusing them. This ability genetically was not homogenous in the population. It's something that some people have more of it than others, simply because of the luck of the draw. Whenever that a baby is made, you get some genes from the father and some genes from the mother. And if you happen to not have the one for energy manipulation, well, sorry, you can't do it. And it's a genetic basis. Then you take a population that's mixed like this, and the people who don't have the ability fear those who do. And over time, they kill them off.
Wow.
That was the whole point of the witch hunts. They were called witches and they were exterminated. So the ones of us who are left, it's because our people somehow survived the witch hunts. So there are some Europeans who still have those abilities, but not as many as some other cultures. There are Africans that entire regions have that ability. There were Native Americans all up and down North and South America who had those abilities, which is why the Spanish killed them, why the English killed them. The French didn't. You know, every war we have had as the United States, we have demonized the enemy. The same thing happened when the conquistadors came. They were savages because they didn't speak Spanish. And lest anyone think that I'm blaming the Vatican for everything, keep in mind Columbus wiped out the native peoples of the Caribbean in a very short period of time. Under a decade, they were extinct. And he spent the rest of his life in prison in Spain because it was more than they could stomach. You know, those 60 and backs that I'm doing the whole armada, one of those, I have a commanding officer from hell, and he keeps ordering things that are illegal under regulations for him to order me to do. And they are offensive, insulting things, sexual in nature. I eventually got fed up with this son of a bitch. And I have psi abilities that are made stronger by the black goo there. People should not be scared of me. I can only do it there. There are firewalls in place where I can't do this here. But I finally got so pissed at this man that I stared him down and visualized the center of his brain getting hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter until his head finally exploded. And then I went and got the pieces and took him to medbay to be put into regen. It was not my intention to kill him permanently. It was my intention to inform him that this was unacceptable behavior and that I could stop him. And when he recuperated, he did a court-martial as commander of the fleet. And he never reported the full truth to Oberkommando. Yeah, well, they charged me guilty of murder and insubordination and assault on a commanding officer. I was probably guilty of assault on a commanding officer. And so I was spaced. And they had a rope around me because I was still the only navigator for the whole fleet. They couldn't kill me. So they sent me out, let me experience being spaced, dying from that, brought me in, popped me into regen. So every time we see each other on the ship, and remember, we're on this ship for 60 years together, I remind him of exploding his head. So it turned into a really toxic relationship between the two of us. There were a group of mantids who contacted me about 3 years ago. They were not part of the Mantid Empire. They were not part of the folks on Mars. They were a different group. And they had been involved in a war, and their homeworld had been destroyed, and they had like 6 ships full of their people and nowhere to go. And they contacted me to make contact with Das Bundes. That's what the breakaway culture calls itself, the Federation in English. And they made it really clear when they contacted me that they considered they were summoning a demon. And I was like, I didn't think I was that bad. It was war. I wasn't, when I'm not at war, I'm not dangerous. Well, not actively dangerous. I guess potentially dangerous is better description. But it was a real shock to my system to have an entire race of beings, and they're a hive mind race. So I was contacted by all of them at once. And I said, so what am I that you guys think I'm a demon? And they called me a destroyer of worlds. I'm like, I see. So many of the folks that I know here on Earth would have considered the mantids to be demons, and yet they thought I was bad.
Right.
So, the irony of it, and the impression I got from their telepathic connection was that they used my name to frighten children to be good. That they literally thought I was the devil. And yet they were coming to me for help because they were that desperate. How do you deal with that? I mean, on Earth, I've been a pretty good kid. I have to deal with the memories after I reintegrate the altars, but, it's like I have no control over what that version of me is doing. I don't even share memory until reintegration. And it's to think that much of the galaxy sees me as a demon is horrifying. And I'm trying to get people to understand these black ops in space, all 6 major factions and the 1,000 or so smaller ones, were all out there invading other people, destroying worlds, taking what we want and destroying what's left, just like we do on Earth. We're not heroes out there. We're monsters. And it needs to stop. But I did manage to get a hold of Das Bundes, and I passed on what I translated as a request for a new homeworld. And I requested it to be somewhere that did not already have its own sentient life form. And they found them a world. It was a little bit small for them compared to what their homeworld had been, but it was a jungle planet that had everything it would need. It was just a little on the small side. And they were just absolutely tickled. And, they occasionally come check on me since then out of gratitude. So that was cool. I may be a demon, but at least I helped somebody. And they were like, well, why did you help us? And I said, I'm not at war with you anymore. The version of me here, all of that's done. I have no reason to do you harm, and your request was reasonable. And they were like, oh. I have destroyed more worlds than I can even possibly count between these 91 trips. I remember being on a bridge and seeing the screen of the planet below, and that there was an EMF shield around the planet that we could not get a missile through. And I linked to the computer on the missile and replaced it as it went through the EMF because it destroyed the computer. And so it was me running the missile. And as it hit, I watched it on the screen on the ship, and the whole thing just giant fiery ball. I remember dropping rocks. I remember dropping asteroids.
Eventually,
All you have to do is drop it from orbit, and the kinetic energy of the fall turns into this horrific weapon. I remember we would show up in orbit and the planet would surrender to the Draco. In 2015, I did regression hypnosis with a lady in Tracy. And instead of doing a 3-hour session like we had negotiated, she decided to spend an 8-hour day with me. And the last hour of it, I was out of hypnosis, and she was trying to convince me that I was still a normal human being. She was saying, I hear a lot of this, it's okay, you're fine, but she was trying. And I came out of that with the sure understanding that military laboratories had modified me with reptilian DNA. And I still didn't know what race or how much, but that was the source of my abilities. And they were getting stronger by the day. The more stuff I got cleared out, the stronger and clearer my own abilities were. As I've remembered the psionics, I've been able to use parts of it here on Earth. And it's the same idea of you have these blocks that are because of how you're raised. Like you believe solid objects are solid, and really they're not. And I have memories of putting my hand through solid objects, of moving through solid objects simply on the subconscious belief that because they're not really solid, just the space between atoms, that you can move through without interacting. But you really, really have to believe it at your core, or else you find yourself starting through and getting stuck. Yeah. The abilities that I have now are behind a firewall, where I have to believe that my life's in danger. Some of them I have access to. I'm telepathic.
I've read people's thoughts, and I've projected where other people were reading mine. More or less, I was putting my thoughts in their heads. And once I realized that's what I was doing, I've worked really hard to not invade people's minds. What is it? Randy Kramer describes it as the blue helmet, to keep your own thoughts in your own head.
Oh. What I do is I enter through their eyes. Oh. Your eyes are literally the doorway to your soul or your mind. So I enter through their eyes. And glasses don't matter. It can be a photograph. If I'm in person, I will lock eyes with you. And it's like my consciousness goes to you. And I've been told that they don't even notice it happening, but that when I start to talk to them through that connection, that they can hear it loud and clear, that it's not like booming, but it's, it's like how I talk. And that it comes through in my voice, so they know it's me. And some of the other people who I've had telepathic interaction with say that they can see my face like on a screen in front of them. Okay. So they know it's me. I'm not trying to hide who or what I am. And I'm just talking to them. And as they think their response, I hear it. I'm not digging through their mind. But I have a real easy time going in and sometimes a really hard time getting out. So I don't like to do that because of the hard time getting out. When I started realizing some of the abilities that I had because the agencies left me chipped into various weapons platforms, And I had to stop and actually think about, okay, I'm attached to this. I have these capabilities. Do I really need to be using them? So yeah, the only time I can really use them is if I think I'm in personal danger, and not just like my hand's going to be slapped, but like I'm going to be killed. Then I can suddenly access the switchboard that has a dozen different kinds of weapons, and they're all weapons of mass destruction. And I'm like, no, I don't want to blow up the planet over this idiot shooting at me. Yeah, retribution is something that the animal part of us really wants. And I had to work through all of that as well. And I have abilities that made it a lot easier because I'm still chipped into the Star Wars platform. Surprise, surprise, Reagan's planetary defense system that he aimed at the communist countries is still up there, and I'm still chipped into it. So it would have been real easy to just completely kill thousands of people. And I had to stop and think, because the penny from Earth has an ethical compass, even if all my alters don't. I mean, like the CIA is going to give an alter an ethical compass. The story as I know it is that there was a treaty between the United States government and a extraterrestrial group that's known as the Big-Nosed Greys. So they were given this multi-level cave in Dulce. Okay, as I understand it, they were genetically modified by the Draco, and they are missing 2 hormones to stay alive. And they get that by feeding off animals and sometimes people. They are one of the more dangerous life forms. Okay. So they've got this cave, and they've got these humans having to work with them. And they were doing biology experiments. And they were kidnapping people from all over the country and Latin America. And at one time, they had up to 30,000 American women there for genetic experiments to make babies. And Jimmy Carter was president then. And Jimmy Carter was a very religious man. And when he found out they were keeping American women there for babies to experiment on, he became righteously indignant and ordered the invasion. And that's part of why he was one of the last presidents to be read into everything, was because in modern terms, he lost it and decided that this was not acceptable. And he found out because Phil Schneider's group accidentally broke in. They were building a deep underground military base and had not been told Dulce was there. And so they broke in, there was a battle. And then afterwards, when it all went down and was reported to Jimmy Carter, he got mad and sent in troops. And they rescued some of the women, but most of them were killed. And a lot of them were mentally deranged from having been around extraterrestrials for that long. And within a matter of months, the base was up and running again with newly kidnapped people. And they had a place called the Hall of Horrors. And in 2017, I was attacked. There was a device in my wall that hit me in the back while I was on my computer. And because it was a life-threatening situation for me, I had access to my psionic abilities. And I tracked the energy from the maser through my smart meter, through the electrical wires back to a computer in Dulce, in the ET cave. And my intention was to just blow up that particular terminal. Instead, I accessed the weapons platform that's in space. It's part of President Reagan's Star Wars program. I was chipped into that. So when I'm in that mode, it takes down my firewall so I can access this. This is not something I can do on command, okay? But if I believe my life is in danger, I can access this control panel. And there are 6 weapons. And I consciously chose the smallest one to blow up this one terminal that was responsible for me being shot at. The smallest weapon creates a mini black hole. Didn't know that. But because I was remote viewing while I was doing this, I watched this black hole create itself, and I watched it flash. First it was black, then it flashed white, and then faded through yellow, orange, red, and into complete darkness. And I was like, was this real or was this imagination? But as soon as I blew up the place, the maser shut off. So I'm like, okay, I stopped the source of being shot at. And it took me a good 2 months to heal from that because masers burn. And I have a friend who lives in Moscow. He's a psychic. And without telling him what I did, I asked him to read the Dulce base. Boris described the weapon going off and the colors changing and complete destruction. You know, when I do these things to places that are manned, I actually put things through the computer saying, evacuate now, this is not a drill. And I usually give them 15, 20 minutes to get out of the building. I have so much blood on my hands from the Black Ops that I really don't want to kill people here. The Black Ops, I had no choice because those were altars and they were mind controlled and it was strictly under orders. I have a choice in this body and I'm not going to kill people if I can help it. I mean, accidents happen. There might be somebody that ignores the warning and stays at their desk, you know. But I'm doing my best to make sure there are no innocents that are killed. What else did I do? There was an underground base that was close to the Potomac River, and I broke through the wall and let the river flood it out. It's still not in use. I took out the internet relay in Finland that was allowing the NSA access to the Russian internet because the NSA wants to get them. So if you take out the relay, it stops everybody. I fried all the computers at Langley several times simply because they were where mind fractured me. I got angry about what was going on at Bohemian Grove, and I am chipped into the orbiting weapons platform, aka Reagan's Star Wars, and I pulled a menu that I could see and chose a weapon, and I hit Bohemian Grove with that. I was aiming for the owl. I've done that more than once.